Rain hammered the pavement the night Bella opened her door to two shivering strangers. She thought she was just offering cheap tea and a warm fire. She didn't know the fragile old man was the father of the city's most brutal crime lord, and the devil was watching. Flour dusted the front of Bella's oversized apron, clinging to the heavy swell of her stomach. She leaned her weight into the kitchen counter, the faded linoleum groaning faintly beneath her boots. Kneading dough was the only thing that still quieted her mind. Her arms, thick and soft, worked the pale mass with rhythmic, practiced force. The dull ache in her lower back was a familiar companion, a reminder of gravity and time, and the sheer physical toll of carrying herself through a world that preferred women to take up less space. It was past midnight. Outside, the rain sounded like a firing squad against the aluminum siding of her duplex. A sharp knock broke the rhythm of the storm. Bella stopped. She wiped her forehead with the back of her wrist, leaving a streak of white across her brow. The neighborhood was bad. Gunshots were common. Visitors at midnight meant trouble. She wiped her hands on a dish towel and moved toward the front door, her thighs chafing slightly against the worn denim of her jeans. She peered through the peephole. It wasn't trouble. It was just misery. An elderly man and woman stood on her porch. Water poured from the brim of the man's fedora. The woman was clutching his arm, her shoulders shaking violently. They looked terribly out of place. Their clothes, though soaked, were tailored and expensive. Bella undid the deadbolt. The door swelled with the humidity, sticking to the frame before popping open. A gust of freezing wind threw rain into her face. "Car broke down," the old man said. His voice was a thin, reedy rasp. "Phone's dead. Please." Bella hesitated. She was 38, a widow, and she lived alone. She was a big woman, strong enough to heft 50-pound sacks of flour without asking for help. But she was no fighter. If this was a setup, she was an easy mark. She looked at the old woman's blue lips. "Get in," Bella said, stepping back to fill the hallway. She locked the door behind them. The house was warm, smelling heavily of yeast and baked sugar. Bella moved efficiently, stripping the heavy, waterlogged coats from their fragile shoulders. She draped the coats over the radiator. It hissed in protest. "Sit," she told them, pointing to the worn floral sofa in the living room. She went to the hallway closet and pulled out 2 oversized flannel shirts. They had belonged to her late husband, Carl. She handed them over, along with 2 threadbare but clean bath towels. "Dry off. I'll make tea." In the kitchen, Bella filled the kettle. She could hear the old man murmuring to his wife, his tone gentle, soothing. She arranged 3 mismatched mugs on a tray. She added a plate of yesterday's scones, a little dry, but the butter would soften them. She carried the heavy tray into the living room, setting it on the coffee table with a thud. "Drink," Bella commanded softly. The old woman, Edith, wrapped her shaking hands around the hot porcelain. "You are very kind," she whispered. "We took a wrong turn. The engine just died." "It happens," Bella said. She sat heavily in the armchair opposite them. The springs squeaked under her weight. She didn't try to perch delicately on the edge. She let herself settle, her broad hips filling the seat, her hands resting on her knees. "You're safe here. The storm will pass by morning." Across the street, parked in the shadow of a boarded-up laundromat, the engine of a black Lincoln Town car idled with a low, menacing purr. Vicente sat in the back seat. The leather was cold. The suppressed automatic pistol rested heavy and indifferent on his thigh. He stared through the rain-streaked window, his jaw clenched so tight the muscle twitched beneath his skin. He had been hunting the crew that ran his parents' sedan off the road. When he found his father's driver bleeding out in an alley, Vicente had expected the worst. He had tracked his parents' movements block by block, following the scattered reports of an old couple wandering through the rain. He had arrived just in time to see them step onto the porch of the peeling duplex. Vicente had almost put a bullet through the front door. Now he watched through the gap in the living room curtains. The optics on his tactical binoculars cut through the dark. He expected to see a hostage situation. He expected to see scavengers picking his parents clean. Instead, he saw a fat woman in a flour-stained apron. He watched her hand his mother a mug. He saw the steam rising from it. He watched the woman sit down, completely unbothered, her large frame commanding the cheap armchair. She wasn't fawning over them. She wasn't holding them for ransom. She was just sitting there, a solid, immovable mountain of exhausted humanity, keeping watch over the two people Vicente loved most in the world. "Boss?" The driver looked back in the rearview mirror. "Do we move in?" "No," Vicente said. His voice was gravel and cold ash. "Stand down." "But your parents are currently eating pastries," Vicente cut in. He lowered the binoculars. The tension that had been coiled in his chest since the phone call slowly unwound, replaced by a strange, quiet fascination. He looked back at the window. Bella had leaned her head back against the chair, her eyes closed. "Run the plates on that rusted sedan in her driveway," Vicente ordered. "Find out who she is, who holds her paper, who bothers her. Everything." Vicente didn't believe in angels. He believed in debts, in leverage, in the absolute certainty of violence. But as he watched the large woman sleep in the chair, guarding his blood, he knew a debt had just been incurred. Morning broke ugly and grey. The storm had washed the grime off the streets, but the city just looked tired beneath the overcast sky. A heavy knock woke Bella. She jerked awake, a sharp pain shooting up her neck. Andy and Edith were already awake, sitting quietly on the sofa, looking significantly better in the pale morning light. Bella hauled herself up. Her knees popped. She rubbed her face, feeling the oily residue of sleep, and shuffled to the door. A man in dirty blue coveralls stood on the porch. A tow truck idled behind him. "Got a call for a stalled vehicle," he grunted, not looking her in the eye. "Belongs to the old folks?" "Yes," Andy said, stepping up beside Bella. He turned to her and reached into his pocket. He pulled out a crisp $100 bill. "For your trouble, my dear." Bella looked at the money. It was more than she made in a week selling baked goods to the local bodegas, but she shook her head, pushing his hand away with thick, flour-dusted fingers. "Keep it. Buy a better GPS, and stay out of this neighborhood." Andy smiled. It was a sharp, knowing smile that didn't quite fit the fragile old man routine. "We won't forget you, Clara." "It's Bella," she corrected tiredly. "Bella," he nodded. She watched them get into the cab of the tow truck. As it pulled away, she locked the door and pressed her forehead against the cool wood. The house felt empty again. She walked into the kitchen, looked at the dried dough on the counter, and sighed. The fantasy was over. Reality was waiting. By noon, the humidity had returned, thick and suffocating. Bella walked the 6 blocks to the grocery store. It was a miserable trek. The friction of her thighs burned. Her breath came slightly short. She hated the way people looked at her, or rather, the way they didn't. To the world, she was invisible furniture. A large, cumbersome obstacle taking up too much room on the sidewalk. She kept her head down, her canvas tote bags digging into her fleshy shoulders. She bought sugar, yeast, and discount butter. She was calculating the remaining balance in her checking account when a heavy hand clamped down on her shoulder just outside the store. "Hey, B." She froze. The smell of stale beer and cheap tobacco hit her before she turned. It was Griggs. He was a local collector for a loan shark who operated out of the nearby auto shop. Carl, her late husband, had left her with a mountain of bad bets. "I don't have it, Griggs. Friday. I told you Friday," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Boss is tired of Friday, B," Griggs sneered. He stepped closer, crowding her. He was a small, wiry man, but he carried the weight of the violence backing him. He shoved her chest. It wasn't a hard push, but the sidewalk was uneven. Bella stumbled back. Her heavy work boots caught on a cracked paving stone. She went down hard. Her palms scraped violently against the concrete. The wind was knocked out of her. A bag of flour burst inside her tote, sending a white cloud up into her face. The humiliation was immediate and absolute. It wasn't just the fall. It was the physical reality of being heavy on the ground. The sheer, undignified effort it took to roll over, to get her knees beneath her, to heave her body weight back up, while a dozen people on the street suddenly found something very interesting to look at in the opposite direction. "Friday, B," Griggs spat, stepping over her groceries. "Or we take the ovens." Bella didn't cry. Crying was for women who had someone to wipe their tears. She just sat on the curb for a moment, breathing heavily, wiping the grit and blood from her palms onto her jeans. Then she gathered her broken bags and walked home. 50 yards away, sitting at a corner cafe table with an untouched espresso, Vicente watched her walk away. His face was an unreadable mask, but the coffee cup in his hand cracked under the pressure of his grip. Hot espresso spilled over his knuckles. He didn't feel it. He watched Bella drag herself down the street, her shoulders slumped, the white flour dusting her dark clothes like snow. Vicente pulled out his phone. "Griggs," he said into the receiver, "works out of the auto shop on 4th. Bring him to the meat locker. Leave the teeth." He hung up. 2 days later, Bella was working the counter of her small kitchen bakery. The bruises on her palms were purple and yellow, making it painful to grip the rolling pin. The neighborhood had been quiet. Strangely quiet. A rumor was floating around that Griggs had left town in a hurry. Bella didn't ask questions. Survival in her neighborhood meant minding your own business. The little bell above her front door jingled. Bella wiped her hands on her apron and turned. The air in the small room seemed to instantly evaporate. The man who walked in didn't belong here. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her duplex. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his posture rigidly straight. He had dark hair, graying at the temples, and eyes that looked like wet concrete. He smelled of bergamot, expensive leather, and a faint, metallic trace of gun oil. He didn't look at the display case. He looked directly at her. "Can I help you?" Bella asked. Her voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat, suddenly painfully aware of how she looked. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity. The apron was stained. She felt massive and clumsy under his steady gaze. "I need a cake," Vicente said. His voice was deep, smooth, but carrying an undercurrent of absolute authority. "Any particular kind?" she asked, leaning against the counter to hide her shaking hands. "Whatever you recommend." He stepped closer. His eyes tracked down to her hands. He saw the purple bruises on the heels of her palms. A muscle in his jaw twitched. "You hurt yourself." It wasn't a question. It was an observation, delivered with strange intimacy. Bella pulled her hands back, folding them over her stomach. "Just a clumsy fall. What's the occasion for the cake?" "An anniversary," Vicente lied smoothly. He didn't break eye contact. He watched the way she breathed, the way she held herself. Most people shrank away from him. This woman didn't shrink. She couldn't. She stood her ground, a solid anchor in a room filled with sugar and flour. "I have a dark chocolate stout cake in the back," she said, her defensive walls coming up. $20. I'll take it." He reached into his jacket. He didn't pull out a wallet. He pulled out a thick money clip and laid a $50 bill on the glass counter. "I don't have change for that." she said flatly. "Keep it." "I don't take charity, mister." Vicente stopped. He looked at her face, really looked at it. The tired lines around her mouth, the sharp intelligence in her eyes that refused to be pitied. "It's not charity, Bella," he said softly. Bella froze. The chill ran all the way down her spine. "I didn't tell you my name." Vicente slowly picked up the cake box she had placed on the counter. He held it carefully, as if it were glass. He looked at her one last time, the coldness in his eyes melting into something dangerously possessive. "I know," Vicente said. He turned and walked out the door, leaving the $50 bill on the glass, and leaving Bella standing in the deafening silence of her own kitchen. August rolled in like a wet blanket, suffocating the city in heat and garbage-scented humidity. But on Bella's street, the climate had fundamentally changed. The auto shop on 4th Avenue burned down on a Tuesday. The fire was hot, fast, and completely consumed the office where Carl's debt ledger was kept. Bella watched the black smoke curl over the rooftops from her kitchen window. She felt no guilt, just a hollow, echoing relief. The neighborhood grew eerily quiet. The corner boys stopped slinging on her block. The stray cat she fed didn't even have to fight the local raccoons for scraps anymore. It was as if an invisible perimeter had been drawn around her duplex in thick, bloody chalk. And then there was Vicente. He became a fixture. Every Wednesday and Saturday, precisely at closing time. He never parked out front. He walked the last 2 blocks, his dark suits cutting a stark, sharp line through the urban decay. He never asked her out. He never made small talk. He just walked into the heavy, sugar-scented heat of her bakery, sat on the single wobbly stool by the window, and ordered a coffee and a slice of whatever she had baked. He watched her. It unnerved her at first. Men usually looked through Bella, or they looked at her with a fleeting, cruel amusement. Vicente looked at her like she was the only fixed point in a spinning room. He watched the competent, heavy grace of her hands as she boxed pastries. He watched the way she shifted her weight to ease the ache in her knees. He saw the sweat on her brow and the flour dusting her broad hips. He didn't fetishize it, and he didn't judge it. He simply observed her existence with absolute, terrifying focus. "You're scaring my customers," Bella told him one humid Wednesday evening. She wiped down the glass counter, slapping the wet rag against the metal frame for emphasis. Vicente took a slow sip of his black coffee. "There are no customers here, Bella, because you're sitting in the window looking like an undertaker." She threw the rag into the sink. She was exhausted. The heat rash under her breasts was burning, and her lower back screamed. She didn't have the energy to play games with a man who smelled like danger and money. "Who are you, really?" Vicente set the mug down. He didn't fidget. He possessed a stillness that felt violent. "My name is Vicente. I manage logistics for a waste management firm." Bella laughed. It was a harsh, scraping sound. "Right, and I'm a ballerina. The loan sharks who held my husband's paper vanished. The auto shop burned to the ground. Griggs hasn't been seen since he shoved me outside the bodega. You think I'm stupid? I think you are the smartest person I have ever met." He stood up. The bakery was small, and his presence immediately swallowed the available oxygen. He walked to the counter. Bella didn't back away. She planted her feet, crossing her thick arms over her chest, challenging him to cross the boundary. "My father," Vicente said, his voice dropping to a low rumble, "is a very difficult man. He has enemies. 2 months ago, some of those enemies tried to run his car into the river. He and my mother walked 3 miles in a torrential downpour to avoid being hunted in the streets." Bella's breath hitched. She remembered the fragile old man. The $100 bill, the soaked fedora. They knocked on 6 doors before yours, Vicente continued. His eyes locked onto hers, dark and unyielding. 6 doors. People looked out their peepholes and turned the deadbolts. You opened it. You took 2 strangers into your home, fed them, and stood between them and the front door while they slept. I gave them stale scones and a couch, Bella snapped, her heart hammering against her ribs. You gave them sanctuary, Vicente corrected softly. In my world, a debt of blood is paid in blood. A debt of life is paid in life. You are under my protection, Bella, whether you want it or not. Bella stared at him. She saw the exhaustion hiding in the sharp angles of his face. She saw a man who spent his life waiting for the knife in the dark, finding a singular moment of peace in a fat widow's flour-dusted kitchen. I don't need a bodyguard, she said, her voice trembling just a fraction. I need to pay my electric bill. Vicente reached out. He didn't touch her face or her waist. He gently laid his large, calloused hand over her bruised knuckles resting on the counter. His skin was warm. Then bake me another cake, Bella, and let me worry about the dark. Autumn arrived with a sharp, biting wind, but the chill inside Bella's chest had nothing to do with the weather. She knew exactly who Vicente was now. The local news had run a segment on organized crime in the city. They showed a grainy surveillance photo. Vicente Romano, underboss, suspected orchestrator of the 4th Avenue purge. She should have locked the doors. She should have sold the ovens and moved to Ohio. But she didn't. She found herself baking a fresh batch of dark chocolate stout cake every Wednesday. She found herself wearing the blue dress that didn't cling too tightly, but made her feel grounded and strong. She hated herself for it. The deep, embarrassing ache of hope. It was a Tuesday night, long after closing, when the debt of violence finally came to collect. Bella was in the back kitchen, scrubbing baking sheets. Vicente was in the front, sitting on his stool, going through a ledger he had brought with him. The street outside was dead. The sound of breaking glass didn't register as a threat until the heavy crack, crack, crack of suppressed gunfire followed it. Bella dropped the pan. It clattered against the tile like a church bell. "Vicente!" she screamed. She ran toward the front. The display case was shattered. Glass covered the linoleum like ice. Vicente was on the floor behind the counter, a heavy black pistol already in his hand. He was bleeding from a shallow graze on his cheek. Outside, 2 men in dark coats were moving toward the broken door, weapons raised. Rivals, scavengers trying to take the crown while the king was distracted. "Stay down," Vicente roared. Bella didn't drop. She was panicked, but years of carrying heavy burdens gave her a strange, terrifying momentum. She grabbed the closest weapon available, a massive 20-pound cast-iron skillet resting on the prep table. One of the gunmen stepped through the shattered doorway. He aimed at Vicente's exposed shoulder. Bella swung. She put all 240 pounds of her weight into the pivot. Her broad shoulders rotated, her thick arms acting as a fulcrum. The heavy iron skillet caught the gunman flush in the side of his skull. The sound was sickening, a wet, heavy crunch. The man folded instantly, dropping his gun and collapsing into the glass. Vicente didn't hesitate. He rose onto one knee, tracking the second man outside the window, and fired twice. The glass spider-webbed. The shadow outside dropped to the pavement and didn't move. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the hiss of the espresso machine and Bella's ragged, gasping breaths. She stood over the unconscious man in her bakery, the iron skillet trembling in her hands. Blood was splattered across the hem of her blue dress. She felt entirely unmoored, the adrenaline draining from her system to leave behind a cold, shaking nausea. Vicente kicked the dropped weapon away from the man on the floor. He holstered his gun and turned to Bella. He didn't check the perimeter. He didn't call his men. He walked straight to her and carefully took the heavy iron pan from her shaking hands, setting it on the counter. Then he gripped her shoulders. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his voice rough, frantic. His eyes scanned her face, her chest, her arms, searching for a wound. "No," she choked out. She looked at the blood on his cheek. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." Vicente let out a long, shuddering breath. He pulled her against his chest. Bella froze. She was so unused to being held. She felt massive, awkward, sure that her stomach was pressing uncomfortably against him. But Vicente didn't hold her like she was a burden. He wrapped his arms around her broad back and buried his face in her hair, pulling her solid frame tight against his own. He anchored himself to her. "I brought this to your door," he whispered, his voice vibrating against her collarbone. "I swore I would protect you, and I brought the war to your kitchen." Bella closed her eyes. The smell of cordite mixed with the scent of baked sugar. She slowly lifted her thick arms and wrapped them around his waist. He was hard muscle and steel, but he was trembling. "You didn't bring the war, Vicente," she said quietly, her voice finding its steady rhythm again. "You just stopped me from fighting it alone." He pulled back just enough to look at her. The cold, dead look in his eyes was gone. In its place was a fierce, burning reverence. He touched her cheek, his thumb brushing a streak of flour from her skin. "Come with me," he said. It wasn't a command, it was a plea. "Leave this place, the bakery, the debt, the neighborhood. I have a house in the hills. It's quiet. My mother asks about you every day. Come home with me." Bella looked around her ruined shop. The shattered glass, the bullet holes in the plaster, the life she had scraped together from the ashes of her husband's failures was gone. But for the first time in 10 years, she didn't feel the crushing weight of panic. She looked at the dangerous, exhausted man standing in front of her. She wasn't a fragile princess needing rescue. She was a woman who had survived the absolute bottom, and she had just defended her own ground. "Okay," Bella said, her voice clear and strong. "But I'm taking the ovens." Vicente smiled. It was a real smile, breaking through the grim mask he wore for the world. He pressed his forehead against hers. "Take whatever you want, Bella. The world is yours." If you felt the raw tension and emotion in Bella and Vicente's unconventional love story, don't keep it to yourself. Smash that like button, share this video with your fellow romance lovers, and subscribe to our channel for more deeply human, thrilling narratives. We bring you gripping stories where real strength shines through the darkest shadows. Drop a comment below. Would you have swung that iron skillet? Let us know, and stay tuned for our next gritty masterpiece.